January 26, 1962. Naples International Airport, 6:30 in the evening. A 64-year-old man in a tailored suit walks through the terminal. His face is weathered. A scar runs along his right jaw. His right eyelid droops slightly. Those are souvenirs from a night in 1929 when rival gangsters beat him, stabbed him, and left him for dead on a Staten Island beach. He survived that night. They called him Lucky ever since. Charles Lucky Luciano has just finished a meeting with an American film producer. For years, the most powerful crime bosses in America begged him not to tell his story. Now, with his long-time love dead and his empire an ocean away, he no longer cares. He wants the world to know who he really was. He never gets the chance. As Luciano approaches the terminal exit, his chest tightens. His left arm goes numb. He staggers, then collapses onto the cold airport floor. Within minutes, the man who built the American Mafia, who commanded an empire worth hundreds of millions, who once controlled New York City itself, is dead. Italian police officers who had been following him, waiting to arrest him on drug trafficking charges, watch helplessly as the most powerful gangster of the 20th century dies at their feet. But 3,000 miles away in New York, his family receives the news. His brother Bartolomeo, his sisters Filippa and Concetta, nieces and nephews who grew up in the shadow of the most infamous name in American crime. For 16 years, they had lived with their brother in exile. Now they would live with his legacy forever. One brother would fight to bring his body home. A former lover would be found dead in a Paris apartment, having never recovered from losing him. And the criminal empire, Luciano built from nothing, would tear itself apart in a war for control. This is what happened to Lucky Luciano's family after his death, and why his bloodline reveals the ultimate truth about building an empire on blood. If you are fascinated by the hidden fates of history's most powerful families, subscribe now. You will not want to miss what comes next. To understand what the Luciano family lost, you first have to understand what Lucky built for them. Salvatore Lucania was born on November 24, 1897, in Lercara Fredi, a dusty mining town in the hills of Sicily. His father, Antonio, worked in the sulfur mines. His mother, Rosalia Caffarella, raised 5 children in poverty. Bartolomeo came first in 1890, then Salvatore in 1897. Giuseppe followed in 1898. 2 daughters completed the family, Filippa in 1901, Concetta in 1903. The Lucanias were poor, but Antonio had ambition. Every year he bought a calendar from a Palermo steamship company. Every week he put coins in a jar under his bed. He was saving for America. In 1906, the family finally had enough. They boarded a ship and crossed the Atlantic. They settled on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, crowded into a tenement with thousands of other Italian immigrants. Antonio found work as a mechanic in a brass factory. The children went to school. They were supposed to become Americans. Salvatore had other plans. By age 10, he was already in trouble. Shoplifting, fighting, running with older boys. At 14, he dropped out of school and took a job delivering hats for $7 a week. Then he won $244 in a dice game. He never worked a legitimate job again. Young Salvatore started his first criminal enterprise while still a teenager. He offered protection to Jewish kids walking home from school, pay him 10 cents a week, or face a beating from Italian and Irish gangs. One Jewish boy refused to pay. His name was Meyer Lansky. Instead of fighting, the two became partners. It was a friendship that would reshape American crime. By his early 20s, Salvatore had changed his name to Charles Luciano. He ran with the 5 Points gang. He dealt heroin. He worked as a pimp. He learned the business of crime from the ground up, and he caught the attention of the men who ran New York's underworld. The 1920s were golden years for gangsters. Prohibition had outlawed alcohol, creating a black market worth billions. Luciano became one of the Big Six bootleggers who controlled the East Coast liquor trade. He worked for crime boss Joe Masseria. He made millions. He lived in a suite at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel under the name Charles Ross. He wore custom suits. He dated Broadway showgirls. But Luciano wanted more than money. He wanted power. In 1931, he got it. A bloody gang war called the Castellamarese War had been raging between Masseria and rival boss Salvatore Maranzano. Luciano saw an opportunity. He secretly allied with Maranzano, then arranged for Masseria to be murdered at a Coney Island restaurant. 4 gunmen shot Masseria while Luciano was conveniently in the bathroom. 5 months later, Luciano turned on Maranzano too. On September 10, 1931, 4 men posing as government agents walked into Maranzano's office and killed him. In a single year, Luciano had eliminated both of New York's most powerful crime bosses. Then he did something no gangster had ever done. Instead of declaring himself the new boss of bosses, Luciano created a system. He organized New York's Italian gangs into 5 families. He established the Commission, a governing body where crime bosses would vote on major decisions. He built alliances with Jewish and Irish gangsters that his predecessors had refused to consider. Luciano had transformed a collection of warring gangs into a national corporation of crime. He was not just a boss, he was an architect. Time magazine would later call him the criminal mastermind who built an empire. For his family back in the tenements, life changed overnight. Antonio and Rosalia Lucania were simple people. Antonio still worked at the factory. Rosalia still kept house. But suddenly, their son was one of the most powerful men in New York. Money flowed. The family moved to better housing. Lucky bought a mausoleum at St. John's Cemetery in Queens for $25,000 in 1935. It had space for 16 coffins. He was planning for the future. His siblings kept their distance from his criminal life. Bartolomeo worked as a barber. Giuseppe held various jobs. Filippa became a milliner in a hat shop before marrying a man named Michael Galasso. Concetta worked in a cap factory before marrying a man named Di Giacomo. They lived quietly. They used their real name, Lucania. They let their brother be Lucky Luciano while they remained ordinary Americans. But ordinary Americans do not have brothers who run the mafia. In 1935, Antonio and Rosalia Lucania died. They were buried in the mausoleum their son had purchased. They never saw what came next. In 1936, an ambitious prosecutor named Thomas Dewey set his sights on Lucky Luciano. Dewey was building a political career on taking down gangsters. He could not prove Luciano's involvement in bootlegging, gambling, or murder. So he went after him for something else: prostitution. Dewey's team raided 200 brothels across New York. They arrested hundreds of prostitutes and madams. Under pressure, some agreed to testify that Luciano controlled a massive prostitution ring. The evidence was thin. Many historians believe Luciano was framed, but it did not matter. On June 7, 1936, Luciano was convicted on 62 counts of compulsory prostitution. 11 days later, he received the longest sentence ever given for such a crime. He was sentenced to 30 to 50 years in state prison. The Luciano family watched as their brother was sent to Dannemora, a maximum security prison near the Canadian border. For the first time since he was a teenager, Lucky was not in control. But this comfortable existence had a fatal flaw. Lucky Luciano could run the mafia from prison. He could not run it from a grave. World War II saved him. In 1942, the United States Navy approached Luciano with a proposition. German submarines were sinking ships off the American coast. Sabotage plagued the New York docks. The Navy knew that the mafia controlled the waterfront. They needed help. Luciano agreed to cooperate. He ordered his men to protect the docks. He allegedly provided intelligence for the Allied invasion of Sicily. In exchange, Governor Thomas Dewey, the same man who had sent him to prison, commuted his sentence. There was one condition: Luciano had to leave America forever. On February 10, 1946, Lucky Luciano boarded a ship in Brooklyn Harbor. He was being deported to Italy, a country he had left as a 9-year-old boy. His brothers Bartolomeo and Giuseppe came to see him off. They shared a final spaghetti dinner on the ship the night before it sailed. Lucky Luciano never set foot in America again while he was alive. In Exile, Luciano settled in Naples. He lived in a comfortable apartment. He had money, sent by his American associates. He had power, though it was fading. And in 1948, he found love. Her name was Gay Orlova. She was an Italian ballerina and nightclub dancer. She was 20 years younger than Luciano. He called her the love of his life. They met in early 1948. By summer, she had moved into his Naples home. Some reports say they married in 1949. Others say they only exchanged rings. Luciano himself denied being married. But for the next 11 years, they lived as husband and wife. It was not a peaceful relationship. Luciano continued his affairs with other women. He and Exile argued constantly. On several occasions, he hit her, but she stayed. She loved him despite everything. Then came the diagnosis: breast cancer. Exile fought the disease for months. In 1959, she died. She was only 42 years old. Friends said Luciano was never the same. The man who had survived beatings, stabbings, prison, and exile was broken by the death of a dancer from Milan. He became withdrawn. He drank more. He started talking about telling his life story, something he had always refused to do. But Exile was not the only woman whose life was destroyed by loving Lucky Luciano. Before Exile, there was Gay Orlova. Born Galina Orlov in Russia in 1915, she came to America as a teenager and became a Broadway dancer. She was blonde, beautiful, and fearless. By the early 1930s, she was a star of Earl Carroll's Vanities Review. She met Luciano in late 1934 while performing in Miami. She fell for him instantly. She moved into his suite at the Waldorf Astoria. When reporters asked about her infamous boyfriend, she gushed. "Oh, I'm infatuated with Lucky," she told prosecutors. "He's so sinister." When Luciano fled to Arkansas in 1936, Gay went with him. When he was arrested and tried, she wanted to testify on his behalf. Luciano refused. "I don't want her mixed up in this case," he told his lawyers. After his conviction, Gay tried to stay in America. She had married a young theater usher named Edward Finn in 1934, hoping to secure citizenship. But when Finn learned about her affair with Luciano, he sought an annulment instead of a divorce. The annulment erased her citizenship. In 1937, Gay sailed to France, planning to return. When she arrived back at New York Harbor, authorities refused to let her off the ship. She was sent back to Paris. For the next decade, Gay Orlova spiraled. She modeled. She danced. She had a brief marriage to a French count. She had an affair with a married Chilean diplomat. Through it all, she never stopped hoping for a reunion with Lucky. When Luciano was released and deported to Italy in 1946, Gay saw her chance. She tried to get permission to visit him. She was refused. She tried to contact him through intermediaries. Nothing worked. By 1948, Luciano had met Gay Orlova and moved on. Gay Orlova could not. On February 12, 1948, neighbors in her Paris apartment building noticed a strange smell. They broke down her door. Gay was dead. She had turned on the gas and taken her own life. She was 33 years old. The newspapers barely covered her death. She was just another showgirl who had loved a gangster. The character Gay Dawn in the 1948 film Key Largo was partially inspired by her. In Hollywood's version, the gangster's mole survived. In real life, Gay Orlova did not. Back in New York, the Luciano siblings lived quiet lives. They avoided publicity. They raised families. They watched from afar as their brother's empire continued without him. Bartolomeo, called Bartolo by the family, was the oldest sibling. He had come to America before the rest of the family, arriving in 1905. He became a barber. He married. He stayed out of trouble. When reporters or authorities came asking about his famous brother, he said little. Giuseppe, called Joseph, was closest in age to Lucky. He also kept his head down. He worked. He married. He avoided the spotlight that followed anyone named Lucania. The sisters, Filippa and Concetta, married and took their husbands' names. Filippa became Fanny Galasso. Concetta became Connie Di Giacomo. They raised children. They lived in the New York area. They visited the family mausoleum where their parents lay. None of them joined their brother's criminal enterprise. None of them became mobsters or associates. They were the legitimate Lucanias, living ordinary American lives while their brother built an empire of crime, but they could never fully escape his shadow. When Lucky died at Naples Airport in 1962, Bartolo moved quickly. He wanted his brother buried in America, in the family mausoleum Lucky had purchased decades earlier. The US government had to approve the request. After all, Luciano had been deported. He had been banned from ever returning. The approval came. Death had granted Lucky Luciano what life had denied him. He could come home. 300 people attended the funeral service in Naples. The crowd included deported American mobsters, Italian criminals, and undercover narcotics agents who filmed everyone present. Luciano's body was placed in a horse-drawn hearse and paraded through the streets of Naples. Then came the flight home. On February 7, 1962, a Pan American cargo plane landed at New York International Airport. Inside was a large wooden crate. A small metal plate on the crate bore the name Salvatore Lucania, not Lucky Luciano. It was his birth name. Only 2 mourners waited at the airport. Bartolo Lucania was 72 years old. A nephew, also named Salvatore Lucania, waited too. He had been named after the uncle he barely knew. Surrounding them were 50 federal agents, narcotics officers, and policemen. Even in death, Lucky Luciano was watched. There was no ceremony at the cemetery. The funeral had been held in Naples. The family simply watched as the casket was placed in the mausoleum Lucky had bought 27 years earlier. His mother and father were already there. An aunt and an uncle were there too. As the bronze doors of the vault closed, a reporter spotted a stained glass window in the back. It showed a bearded saint leaning on a shepherd's staff. The reporter asked Bartolo who the saint was. Bartolo said he did not know. He was not acquainted with saints. More than 2,000 mourners attended the burial. Carlo Gambino, who would become the most powerful mafia boss of his generation, gave the eulogy. The man who had transformed American crime was laid to rest under his birth name, surrounded by the family he had both provided for and burdened. The Luciano siblings lived on. Bartolo died later in 1962, the same year as his famous brother. Giuseppe died in 1963. Filippa outlived them all, dying in 1989 at the age of 87. She had spent 53 years as a widow's sister, an aunt, a quiet woman in Harrison, New York. Concetta's death date is not publicly recorded. She faded into the anonymity she had always sought. None of Lucky Luciano's siblings left memoirs. None gave interviews. They took their memories of their brother to their graves. But what about the next generation? What about Lucky Luciano's bloodline? Here is the truth that made this family's story unique among crime dynasties. Lucky Luciano had no children. None. He never became a father. It was not an accident. It was a choice. He explained that he did not want any son of his to go through life as the son of Luciano, the gangster. He said that was one thing he still hated Dewey for, making him a gangster in the eyes of the world. The man who built empires, who commanded thousands, who reshaped American crime, refused to create heirs. He knew what his name meant. He knew what his children would inherit. Not money, not power, shame. So, the direct Luciano bloodline ended with him. But his siblings had children. Nieces and nephews grew up knowing their uncle was the most famous gangster in America. One of them, Salvatore Lucania, was at the airport when his uncle's body came home. Another named Judy appears in family records. Salvatore Lucania, known as Sal, was born in 1942, the same year Lucky was negotiating with the Navy from his prison cell. He grew up in East Harlem, surrounded by the mafia culture his cousin helped create. He dropped out of Catholic high school at 15 after punching a priest. He could have become a made man. The path was open, but he chose differently. In 2016, Sal published a memoir called The Gangster's Cousin, Growing Up in the Luciano Family. He described the strange experience of sharing a name with American crime's founding father. The expectations, the assumptions, the doors that opened and the doors that closed. Sal wrote that he was born an outlaw in outlaw culture. He refused to be forced into the powerless class of the ordinary law-abiding citizen. He always sees things from outside the box because he was born outside the box. Sal did not become a gangster, but he could never fully escape being a Lucania. The true heirs of Lucky Luciano's empire were not his blood relatives. They were his criminal successors. When Luciano went to prison in 1936, he handed day-to-day control of his organization to Frank Costello, the prime minister of the mob. When Luciano was deported, Costello continued running things. But another man was waiting. Vito Genovese wanted the throne. In 1957, Genovese made his move. He arranged for Costello to be shot. Costello survived but got the message. He retired, and Genovese took over. The Luciano crime family became the Genovese crime family. Luciano, watching from Naples, was furious. He and Meyer Lansky allegedly helped frame Genovese on drug charges. In 1959, Genovese was convicted and sent to prison for 15 years. He died there in 1969. The crime family Luciano founded still exists, and it is still called the Genovese family. It is still considered one of the 5 families of New York. The structure Luciano created in 1931 survives to this day. His commission still meets, and his rules still govern. But no one named Lucania sits at that table. Lucky Luciano's biological family scattered into ordinary American life. His nieces and nephews raised children of their own. Those children raised more children. Somewhere in America today, there are great nieces and nephews of Lucky Luciano who might not even know it. The man who wanted no children got his wish. His name died with him. His empire lived on without his blood. In 1998, Time magazine named Lucky Luciano one of the 20 most influential builders and titans of the 20th century. He was listed alongside Henry Ford, Walt Disney, and Bill Gates. The magazine called him a criminal mastermind. His family mausoleum in Queens still stands. Tourists visit it. They take photographs. They stand where Carlo Gambino once gave a eulogy for the father of modern organized crime. Inside that mausoleum lie the remains of Antonio and Rosalia Lucania, the poor immigrants from Sicily who just wanted a better life. Their son gave them one. He also gave them a legacy they never asked for. Luciano said he was never a crumb. A crumb, he explained, was someone who works and saves and lays money aside, someone who indulges in no extravagance. He would rather be dead than be a crumb. He got his wish on that too. The Luciano bloodline is gone now, absorbed into the vast anonymity of America. But the empire he built continues. The 5 families still operate. The commission still meets. The structure created by a 9-year-old immigrant from Sicily still shapes organized crime nearly a century later. Lucky Luciano built something that outlasted his own blood. Whether that makes him a success or a failure depends on what you think a legacy should be. His contemporary, and sometimes rival, understood the same brutal truth about crime dynasties. He too built an empire. He too watched it crumble. He too left a family behind to carry a name that was both famous and cursed. If you want to see what happened to Al Capone's family after his death, watch that video now.